Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. I've learned additional details about Shannan Gilbert from an in-depth article in New York Magazine. Gilbert is one of the escorts whose remains were found along Ocean Parkway on the south shore of Long Island in 2011. Ironically, it was when investigators were looking for Shannon that they instead stumbled on the Gilgo Beach 4 victims. Shannon wasn't found until exactly a year after that. According to Shannon's family, she was working as an escort to support herself as she tried to make it as a singer in New York City. On the fateful early morning of May 1st, 2010, when Shannon traveled the hour-long car ride with a driver to Oak Beach on Long Island to meet a new client, Joseph Brewer, Shannon was wearing a blonde wig, a pair of dangling hoop earrings, a brown leather jacket, and blue jeans. According to the article, on nights like these when Shannon had booked a client, she would tell her boyfriend that she was going on an audition, so it sounds like he didn't know what she was doing. The oldest of 4 daughters, Shannon graduated from high school early at age 16. And by all accounts, she was very bright. Her mother, Mary, said she was book smart, but not street smart. After high school, she worked at Applebee's, at a senior center, and at a hotel. Diagnosed as bipolar, Shannon had recently stopped taking her medication because she didn't like the side effects. She said the meds gave her the shakes. What I'm noticing about a lot of these young ladies, including Shannon, and basically all of the Gilgo Beach 4 victims, is that they did not pursue college degrees and seemed to float around a little bit from low-paying job to low-paying job, and then they found their way to escort work as a way to make, I'm sorry to say it, a better wage. And tragically, I think Shannon definitely had the brights to go to college. It sounds like she maybe didn't have the economic ability to go. So they start doing this escort work and they make a lot of money to them, and they get addicted to the money. By 2007, Shannon had moved in with her boyfriend, and they were living in New Jersey. Once there, she signed on with an escort agency. According to her records, she had 1 arrest after being rounded up in a raid with some other girls from Upper Saddle River. Shannon also fell victim to a beating that was so extreme that she needed a titanium plate in her jaw. And in fact, that titanium plate was one of the things that helped to identify her remains. Now, 2 years before her death, Shannon started posting her own ads on Craigslist where she could make $200 an hour and keep 2/3 of the fee. The other third went to her drivers. These were guys who would take her to her trysts and stay and provide security. According to the article in New York Magazine, Shannon was one of the escorts who liked to party. She was said to indulge in pot, cocaine, and prescription drugs. But if she was careful and she didn't blow too much of the money on these substances, she could come home after doing maybe 5 calls on a night with around $600 of cash in her pocket. With all that money coming in, she was eventually able to move into her own apartment. And she wasn't just doing this escort thing and partying all the time. She was also taking a series of online college courses in a bid to stop escorting at some point. So it sounds like although she liked to party, she was still looking to the future. She also enjoyed visiting her family, taking her 3 sisters shopping, and buying gifts for her nieces and nephews. Her mom, Mary, was aware of how Shannon was earning her money and tried to tell her not to do it. She told her she could move back home with her, but Shannon was stubborn and she refused. She would often say, quote, "Mom, I hardly have to do nothing and I get thousands of dollars," end quote. On the day she went missing, Shannon headed to Oak Beach after being contacted by 46-year-old Joseph Brewer, who was separating from his wife. Brewer had found Shannon from her Craigslist ad. Her driver that night, Mike Pack, a guy who'd driven her before, left Manhattan with her just after midnight. So again, it's May 1st of 2010. 23-year-old Shannan Gilbert is headed out to Oak Beach with a driver. They arrived at Brewer's house on Oak Beach at around 2 a.m. During the time that Shannon was in Brewer's house, Pack waited for her in the SUV, playing poker on his cell phone. Mike Pack and another source reportedly saw Shannon and Brewer leave Brewer's house at one point in Brewer's car. I originally thought that Mike Pack had driven them, but instead it was Joseph Brewer. It was a short 15-minute trip, and then they were back at the house. Brewer would later tell the police that they drove to CVS for some supplies and then came back, but Mike Pack said it would not have been unusual for Shannon to look for drugs during a tryst, so he thought perhaps that might have been where she went. Per Mike Pack, at around 5 a.m., Joseph Brewer came out of the house to ask for help with Shannon. Once inside, Pack says he found Shannon in a panic, hiding behind a sofa and clutching her phone. She was holding her phone because she'd in fact dialed 911 at 4:51 a.m. to ask for help. And for somebody working as an escort, that is a highly unusual thing to do, so she must have really been fearing for her life. She kept the operator on the line for 23 minutes. The tragedy was that Shannon didn't know where she was. She couldn't tell the operator the address, or even the name of the community in Long Island. On the 911 call, Shannon's voice sounds slurred at times, but mostly she sounds panicked. Mike Pack says he tried to get Shannon to leave the house with him, but she refused. Pack said that she seemed delirious and he thought it was due to drugs. Frustrated, Pack walked out of Brewer's house, got in his SUV, and he continued to wait for Shannon. He said that a minute or two later, Shannon bolted from the house, stumbled down the front steps, and took off running down the road. Pack says he followed her in the SUV, but she kept running and screaming for help. And note that she didn't run toward the entrance of the community. Instead, she ran in the opposite direction, which would have led her to some marshes. Shannon ran to the front door of a neighbor, 75-year-old Gustav Coletti, who was up early and he was shaving, and he heard Shannon's pounding, so he opened the front door. He said Shannon ran inside screaming that her life was in danger. Coletti said he told her he'd call the police, but apparently she begged him not to. That's what this article says. Now, this doesn't make sense because she was also on the line to 911. So why didn't she just ask Coletti for his address so that she could tell the 911 operator? Coletti said Shannon then ran out of his house and out of sight. Pack told the police he spent an hour looking around for Shannon before giving up and heading back to Manhattan. The police finally arrived 45 minutes after Coletti dialed 911. Now at this point the sun was coming up. But by then, the only trace of Shannon was a set of footprints in the sand heading in the direction of Gilgo Beach. Later, the Suffolk County Police searched Joseph Brewer's house. They seized his car, they questioned him, and also they questioned Mike Pack. In fact, both Brewer and Pack say that they were polygraphed, but the police are not confirming or denying that, so we don't know. Brewer later told reporters he didn't sleep with Shannon, and that he just wanted company. Yeah, sure. Sure, Joseph. He also said he saw no drugs. Well, can we really believe that? Joseph may be a liar, pants on fire. Allegedly. But there was also a strange neighbor in Oak Beach named Dr. Peter Hackett, and Shannon was last seen near his home, and 2 days after Shannon vanished, Dr. Peter Hackett made a disturbing phone call to Shannon's mother, Mary. Per Mary, He identified himself and said he was running a home for wayward girls and that Shannon wanted to enter it. A New Jersey detective said Hackett told him the same thing. But when Mary went out to Oak Beach to talk to Hackett, he denied the whole story. Mary believed Hackett did treat Shannon in some way. And by treated, I mean give her some medications, allegedly. So the police turn up, they find nothing. Months go by and all leads dry up. And then on December 11, 2010, just before the first snowfall, a Suffolk County detective let his cadaver dog in training out on the side of the road in Gilgo Beach, 3 miles away from Joseph Brewer's house. Suddenly, the dog hit on a set of bones, but the remains were not Shannon's. There was no titanium plate in the person's jaw. Those remains belonged to escort Melissa Bartholomew. Then, when police searched again in the same area 2 days later, they found 3 more sets of remains. The 4 bodies were all just skeletons without clothing or jewelry. 3 of them were wrapped in burlap. The female victims became known as the Gilgo Four. Later, the investigators announced on December 14th, 3 days later, that they were looking now for a serial killer. So Shannan Gilbert was still missing at that point. But what was scary was that she fit the type displayed by the Gilgo Four. Short in stature, weighing around 100 pounds, gray-green eyes, and working as an escort. It would take over a year before Shannon's remains were found in December of 2011. Shannon's purse and clothing, including her blue jeans, were found in the marsh where her body was located. Some say the pants came off as she ran frantically through the marsh. While it is extremely difficult to navigate because there are tall grasses and reeds and the marsh is wet underfoot, it does seem kind of strange that her pants would come off. The police eventually concluded that Shannon died from falling and drowning by accident in the marsh after having a drug-fueled hallucination. However, when her autopsy was performed a second time by Dr. Michael Bader, no drugs were found in her system, and there was a small crack on her hyoid bone, and another small bone was missing. But some forensic experts say the failure to find any drugs could mean that the time Shannon spent exposed in the marsh meant that they could have been broken down by the elements, so those drugs would not have shown up. Note that Shannon's bra, which was still on her, was cut right in the middle between the cups. That doesn't happen from animals. It was a clean cut, supposedly. The other thing to note is that all of those items, the jeans, the purse, etc., these were found behind Dr. Peter Hackett's house, allegedly, according to the New York Times Magazine article. So the mystery remains. Was Shannon harmed by Joseph Brewer? Was she harmed by Mike Pack, who she sounds equally terrified by on her 911 call? Did Brewer and Pack somehow conspire against Shannon? Did the nosy neighbor Peter Hackett do something to Shannon? Is that why her belongings were behind his house? Or did an alleged killer, Rex Heuermann, was he somehow out there during those early morning hours? Did he come in contact somehow with Shannon out there in that desolate marsh where her body was found? Will we ever know for certain? Adding to the Gilbert family tragedy is that Shannon's mother, Mary, who had 4 daughters, Shannon, Sarah, Sherry, and Stevie, on July 23rd of 2016, so 6 years after Shannon disappeared and 5 years after her body was found, was injured 27 times with a sharp object by Shannon's sister, 27-year-old Sarah, who suffers from schizophrenia. Mary was later found dead on the floor. So now Sarah lives in prison, and Sherry and Stevie are left to carry on the fight for answers and justice for Shannon. Here's a short video clip where you can learn more about Sarah.
Gilbert found stabbed to death inside her home, and one of her own daughters is accused of the crime. CBS 2's Brian Coneybear has the story.
One family hit by two horrific crimes, the latest inside this Ulster County apartment house.
They catch the person or persons involved in Shannon's murder. Then they will also connect the other murders to Gilgo Beach, and we could stop a serial killer.
Mary Gilbert's mission was to find the serial killer she believed murdered her daughter Shannon on Long Island. But now the 52-year-old herself has been murdered, allegedly by another one of her daughters, Sarah Gilbert.
Think about it, a mother being murdered by her own child? Can there be anything that you can consider more horrible than that?
John Ray is the Gilbert family attorney. He's been trying to help solve Shannan Gilbert's 2010 murder. The 24-year-old was working as an escort when she disappeared. Her body found in the brush near Gilgo Beach, Long Island, sparking a gruesome search that turned up 10 more victims, many of them sex workers like Shannon. 3 years ago, Sarah Gilbert spoke to CBS News about her sister's dangerous profession.
She pretty much thought that, it would never happen to her.
27-year-old Sarah Gilbert and her mother lived in separate apartments here at 9 Warren Street in Ellenville. Police say just after 2 p.m. Saturday, Mary was found dead in Sarah's apartment.
Mary was invited into Sarah's home, and in the living room, she was knifed to death.
Attorney John Ray says Sarah is schizophrenic, in and out of mental hospitals, and turned violent in recent months, even threatening to kill her 8-year-old son.
No, that's tragic. That's sad.
Sonny is a neighbor who knows Sarah and says everyone was surprised when she was released from a psychiatric hospital.
They let her go out, and then not 3 months after that, she does this.
Sarah Gilbert is charged with second-degree murder in her mother's death, but no one has ever been arrested in her sister's killing 6 years ago. Reporting from Ellenville, Ulster County, Brian Coneybear.
That's all for tonight. See you next time on Bed Crime Stories. Hey, smash that like button. It's such a huge help.